Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first webinar of the new year. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Patrick Hyland, and I'm the Director of Employee Research at Remesh, and delighted to have so many familiar faces back with us. With me today from Remesh are Emma and Gabby, and we're really excited to kick off the new year with results from our first field study where we went out just 2 weeks ago and talked to over 250 employees, both here in the US and in the UK, and explored their hopes, their fears, and their expectations for a new year. For those of you who have been participating in these monthly webinars, welcome back. You may recall we did this same study just a year ago. And so as we dive into the results, we will be making comparisons, this year's results to last year's results. And I think it really starts to reveal some interesting, complex, nuanced trends that we would love to discuss with all of you. So as I get us going, just before I launch in, just a couple of housekeeping details and some information before we jump into the agenda itself. First, if you do have questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to chat those, and Emma and Gabby will help get those questions to me, and I'm happy to answer those questions at any point. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you have to drop, or if you have colleagues who couldn't attend today, we will be sending out this recording and this deck following the presentation, so you will be getting a copy of this. We've budgeted about 45 minutes. We have about 25 slides. I'm going to move quick and definitely make time throughout and also at the end for your questions. So with that said, here is what we're going to do today. The agenda really is going to focus on three basic parts of this presentation. First, it's really important, we think, to put this new year in context. And we'll do that by taking a look back to 2025, reviewing some of the research that we conducted last year, as well as some of the emerging macroeconomic trends that economists are talking about. Really important to contextualize this data. From there, we'll set up the study specifically. We'll give you some background on what we were seeking to learn. And we'll move into the second part of the presentation, where we're going to talk about employee expectations for 2026. And this part of the presentation is going to be results from the field study, the rapid research field study that we just conducted just a couple of weeks ago. From there, we'll wrap up those results, and we'll talk about three implications for you to consider in your own organizations or your own consultancies as you're working with workforces dealing with all the change that so many of us are experiencing in our organizations. Along the way, I will be featuring results from the Remesh platform, including Remy, which is our new AI agent and research assistant. For those of you who have been using Remesh, if you haven't used Remy, hopefully you'll get a little bit of a sense of how powerful Remy is. And I do encourage you to start experimenting with it, because what I'm finding as a researcher is it really is helping me generate some high quality research in really quick time. So I'll show you what that looks like along the way. So with that as our agenda, let me jump in and try to start to put this new year in context. You know, as we start this new year, and it is, I think, for all of us at Remesh, and I'm sure for so many of you in your own organizations, been quite a month, this month of January. It is just, this new year is moving so fast. When we look back to 2025, the big headline that we saw and heard across our monthly field studies is that 2025 was a really turbulent year for many employees and many organizations. For those of you who have been participating in our monthly webinars, some of these stats may ring a bell. Last January, when we conducted this very same study, What we found is that 32% of employees felt doubtful that the upcoming year, 2025, was going to be successful for their organization. In March, we found that 62% of employees felt a strong sense of anxiety and unease about recent events, political, societal, economic. And then in September, we found that 44% of employees said that 2025 felt at that point more stressful than the prior year. And when we looked at all the open-ended comments that we gathered across our field studies in 2025, what we heard were concerns about volatility, the economy, challenges, uncertainty, tariffs, technology, and a lack of stability. This is what we heard across organizations throughout the year last year. And for those of you working either in consultancies or working with your own workforce, these results, I would imagine, mirror, at least in ways, some of what you heard and experienced in your own organizations. As we get the new year going, the other really important thing that I think we need to keep in mind is that 2025 was turbulent within organizations. And when we look at the economy, both in 2025 and as we launch into 2026, we're now experiencing what many economists describe to be a K-shaped economy, essentially meaning that where you sit on the socioeconomic ladder or the industry or the job or the profession is having a dramatically different impact on your financial well-being. And we see that in some of the metrics that I'm highlighting here. There's so many that highlight this K-shaped economic environment. Over on the left, in 2025 in the US, 1.17 million jobs were lost. Many of us experienced here in the US increasing inflation at 2.7% in 2025. And because this research that we're going to talk about today spans both the US and the UK, the UK ended up the year in December with a 3.4% consumer price index. So inflation, a concern affecting the respondents both in our 2025 sample and this current research sample that we're going to talk about. So we're all facing these really challenging economic headwinds. But the flip side of that K-shaped economy is last year was a blockbuster year in the stock market, 16% year over year increases. And this year, economists are predicting another really solid year, 12%, according to some economists, projected S&P returns. When we look for some economic indicators in the UK, 2026 is projected to be a year of moderate growth at 1.4%. So many of us are having, as we do our work as employee researchers and consultants and leaders and managers, and even as we experience the economy, this really strange dynamic of downward pressure and upward lift, depending on where we are, who we're researching, or the industry that we're in. And so we need to keep this in mind, I think, as we take a look at these 2026 results. With this context in mind, when we started to put together this study back at the beginning of the month, we really said we need to replicate what we did last year. Specifically, what we want to learn with this field study is, as this new year begins, how are employees across industries feeling? How is this K-shaped economy and all these different market conditions and all these different macroeconomic, environmental conditions impacting the employee experience? That's the broad question. And then we specifically wanted to drill into what are employees hoping about for this new year and what are they worried about? We also wanted to understand the priorities that their organizational leaders are setting. And ultimately, we want all of you to walk away with a bit of a sense, based on this exploratory small-scale study, of how you can help your own employees navigate these current conditions. So with that in mind, let me just pause and make a space for Emma and Gabby if we're seeing or hearing any questions so far or reactions to this context setting. I'll pause for a second. Okay. Okay. So with that context in mind, what I want to do next is I want to walk you through what we found in our first rapid research study of the year. We have been emphasizing the need for rapid research, rapid organizational research, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the implications. But what we were able to do in mid-January is field a study that allows us to really understand the here and now experiences and challenges that employees are facing. So I want to walk you through those results. Just to put this study in context, we sought to understand where where employees are. And so what we did was we conducted a field study using the Remesh platform on January 14th, 2026. When I talk about rapid research, this was a study that we posted and then completed within the span of an hour and a half. So the data just poured in quickly. We did that using a flex conversation. For those of you who use Remesh, you know that that is those conversations that you post and you allow to stay open over time and respondents come in. And we also used Remesh's recruit feature, which allowed us to reach out and gather a sample, cross-section of 256 employees working in various organizations. We used a mixed method approach, which I think is so important to explore these complex emerging issues. We were able to ask both open and closed-ended questions and then use all the AI-powered analytical suites and tools on the back end to analyze the data. We'll show you what that looks like. For those of you who have participated in a Remesh conversation, you know that it allows participants this unique opportunity to, first of all, submit their own open-ended responses, and then secondly, see open-ended responses from other people that are participating in that study. And then they have the ability to upvote and downvote, to agree and disagree with those comments that resonate with them. And that really provides us with some important additional data. In terms of the research sample itself, similar to last year, it was a nice split between men and women. This year we had 43% female and 55% male. In terms of generations, we had a smattering of respondents, but you can see that the majority of respondents to this year's study were millennials. We had a nice mix of non-management employees. About half of the research sample that we're going to talk about today, 46%, are non-management employees. The rest are coming from various leadership levels, all the way from frontline managers to the C-suite. Participants this year came from a variety of industries. Education was well represented, technology, manufacturing, healthcare, financial services, retail, professional services. We did have other industries, but these were the ones that had the highest participation by industry. And then, as I noted before, like last year, the research that we're going to show you comes from respondents in both the US and the UK with a nice even split. So with this context set, let's start with really the capstone question that we wanted to explore, and that's about confidence levels. You may have just seen data that came out here in the US, how consumer confidence is declining and has declined significantly as we start out this new year. And so we had a question about employee confidence in their own organizations. And so the first question that we wanted to understand is, how confident do you feel about your organization and whether or not this will be a successful year for your organization? And what we found, which may be surprising when backdropped or compared to some of the economic shifts in confidence, is that 2/3 of respondents in this research study are either very confident or somewhat confident that this will be a successful year for their organization. Below that, you see that 26% are uncertain, and then we have 7% that are doubtful. Over on the right, we take this data and we start to break it apart by the job levels for the respondents. And what you see here, highlighted with those circles, is some differences. We do see that the highest levels of doubt are for those non-management employees, also a certain high degree of uncertainty for non-management employees at 33%. Confidence levels lowest among those non-management employees. The other group where we're seeing a high level of uncertainty is frontline supervisors. Where's the confidence coming from? Middle management. Now, I noted that we conducted this very same study last year, so the question is, how do these results in 2026 compare to confidence levels a year ago? And this is, I think, remarkable in the fact that these results are so similar to last year. When we look at 2026 results and confidence levels, which are presented over on the left, both for all respondents and by different job levels, and compare that with results from a year ago, backdropped in blue over on the right, what we're seeing at the overall sample level, 2026 versus 2025, is a very slight, very small, non-statistically significant, and perhaps I would argue not even practically significant, a decrease in confidence, a bit of a shift from confidence to uncertainty. When you break down these results and these confidence levels across job levels, we are starting to see some shifts that I think are worth noting, none of them dramatic. We do see that for non-management employees, uncertainty has increased. We've seen 7% shift from confident to uncertain. And then also, and this is such a small sample, we need to keep in mind that we're talking about 20 senior managers and C-suite leaders, both in 2026 and 2025, about 20. We're seeing a bit of a shift with two essentially leaders, C-suite leaders, shifting from uncertainty to a sense of doubt. So I would not make a big deal of these shifts. I think that the confidence levels that we're seeing are more similar than different. The other thing as we start to do this year-over-year comparison is that these were two different cross sections. One conducted in 2026, one conducted in 2025. Same questions, but we're not talking to the same people over the course of 2 years. Let me just pause there and make sure and see if there are any questions or reactions as we start to dig into this data.
Patrick, someone did comment, it's interesting that 10% of senior management and C-suite are also doubtful.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we really need to emphasize a couple of things. This overall study is a small exploratory study. So that's the first point. The second thing is that when we start to cut the data, especially for those senior leaders, we're talking about 21 employees this year and 20 last year, right? And so this shift, this 10% shift, is a shift of 2 people. But I do think it's important to pay attention to some of these trends as signals. And especially as we get into the open-ended data, I think we're going to see more signals about attitudinal shifts that we really need to pay attention to. So really good call out. Thank you for noting that. But we really need to interpret this, I think, with caution, small-scale exploratory study. So that is the confidence story. We also asked both this year and last year about the kinds of experiences that employees are having at work. And so what we did was we asked respondents to look across these 8 workplace emotions. 4 of them are positive, balanced, calm, enthusiastic, and energized, and 4 of them are negative, exhausted, frustrated, worried, and miserable. And we asked them to rank order these in terms of how do they feel at work. So they had access to all 8 of these adjectives, these emotions, and then they rank ordered them. And uh, in the platform, these adjectives, these emotions appeared in a randomized order, a different order for each respondent. And consistent, I think, with both last year and the confidence story that I just told you, what we're seeing in this data at the big picture level is that most employees are having positive experiences at work. You can see that 26% said that the first emotion out of these 8 that they feel is balanced. 25% said they feel calm. 14% said they feel enthusiastic, and 7% said they feel energized. You can see that column versus 2025, and you can see that by and large, there are not big changes. There aren't any big lifts or big declines. But it is important to note that while 72% of respondents are having a positive experience at work, reflected by feeling balanced, calm, enthusiastic, or energized, we are seeing that 28% are having a negative experience at work, feeling either exhausted or frustrated or worried or miserable. Over on the right, first exposure to REMI. So again, REMI is a brand new AI agent that Remesh has onboarded over the last 6 months. I have been experimenting with it since September, and I love it. And I am not a huge advocate of technology. I am technologically skeptical. But what I have found as I work with REMI is that it provides me as a researcher with this ability to explore the data quantitatively, qualitatively, to sift through the data in very powerful, dynamic ways that, yes, need to be validated. But what I am finding based on my own experience is that the insights it generates are trustworthy enough for me to utilize, leverage, and validate as needed. But with that ramp up, and if you haven't used REMI, I really do encourage you to do that. I asked REMI to help me identify those employees that are at risk for having a negative experience at work as reflected by these negative emotions. And so what REMI came back to me with is this response. The clearest risk profile for people that are having negative experiences at work are employees who are psychologically doubtful and uncertain from the previous question. And that makes so much intuitive sense. But here's where it really dug in and helped me to surface or to know where to look in the data to validate really the point it's bringing up. Beyond the doubtful, uncertain respondents, it's those who are in non-management roles and women. Those 3 different psychographic and demographic groups were those who were most likely to have higher levels of worry, frustration, exhaustion, and misery. And so to see the data that backs this up, because I needed to validate this, you can see down below when you separate out female non-management, male non-management, female management, and male management, you do see this pattern over on the right of negative emotions being highest at the bottom of the organization for female employees. Those that are having the most positive experience, top of the organization in male. So I think the big picture from these 2 slides, as we start with the quantitative data, and I think this coincides with this K-shaped economy, is we're seeing 2 out of 3 people feel confident in their organization this year, and 72% feel positive at work. That's the big normative story, but we need to pay attention to the fact that a third are feeling doubtful or uncertain, and 28% are having negative experiences at work. We wanted to get beyond just the quantitative data. It's really the qualitative data that Remesh is so wonderful at both gathering and making sense of. And so beyond this story, of confidence and positive experience for most employees, what we do hear is that worries are increasing across a wide range of topics. So, what we asked was this question: what are you most worried about at work this year? And we took all that open-ended data, all the comments from the 250 respondents this year, and we did the same exercise last year. And we used AutoCode within Remesh, which is a large language model powered text analytic tool that does a wonderful job of content coding. And here you can see the most common themes that emerged from all those comments this year. And I was able to look back at the data from last year and provide a side-by-side comparison. So just to make sense of this year, what we found is that 29% of respondents in response to this question are concerned about layoffs and job loss. And you can see that that is a 9-point increase over responses to this very same question a year ago. So we see a lift, but then look at some of these other concerns and worries that are emerging. Company performance and profitability, the economic downturn, of inflation and the broader market conditions, and also my future career. What we saw, a big picture, is that worries are more prevalent in this year's research sample than last year's research sample. What do I mean by that? In 2026, we had 256 respondents. And these 256 respondents used 3,908 words to express their concerns about 2026 in response to this question. Remesh, the platform, the large language model, was able to pull out 451 concerns from all of those comments. That is a 42% increase in concerns year over year. Now, you may stop and say, well, maybe this year's group just wrote more. They were more expressive than a year ago. We do see some evidence of that, but it is on this worry question where we're seeing a pronounced year over year increase in the number of worries expressed in the content categories that emerged. So I think what we start to see here, and this is why we said that this data is complex, we're seeing high levels of confidence, moderately high levels of confidence, 2 out of 3 people feeling confident, 7 out of 10 people having positive experiences at work, but an increasing number of worries being elicited by this question in 2026 versus 2025. We also wanted to know not just what are you worried about, but what are you hoping for this year? What are your
Hey,
biggest career?
sorry,
Yep,
Patrick. Would you mind
sure.
going back 2 slides back? We had 4 questions on not this slide, but the one before. I just
Yep.
wanted to make sure we got to those. The first question was, when looking at the geographical breakout, were results similar for US versus UK? It feels like we're dealing with increased polarization in the US, especially as of late, wondering if things like that impact the positive experiences differently for those two groups.
Great question. I took a bit of a look at that, but I was not able to look at that question by question. Happy to go back and do that. I can say in terms of confidence, because I did a bit of an exploration there, in general, the confidence levels and the patterns that I talked about were similar US, UK, but I'm happy to go back and look at the emotional experience and see if we're seeing any differences there. But a really good question. Absolutely.
The next one was, can any of these be sliced by ethnicity?
Definitely. We didn't gather that as a demographic question, but any and all of these can be, but we as the researchers just asked for demographics, and ethnicity was not one of them for this study.
Mhm.
But another good question.
Yep. Someone else asked, is calm necessarily a positive emotion? Isn't calm the best representation of bored on that list?
Could be. Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, I mean, these are emotions that come, they're informed by the emotional circumplex, and that may be a model of emotions that you find to be useful as you think about the employee experience. You may not. So you can definitely discard any that you're like, well, that could actually reflect boredom. But for me as a researcher, it was a way to organize in a short space positive elements at work, negative elements at work, both last year and this year. but a very valid concern.
The last question was, how do you explain that while we all see a lot of uncertainty in 2025, the data seems remarkably similar to last year's data?
That's what blows me away on multiple levels. I am getting into the qualitative data, and I'm being conscious of time. I know I have you all for another 15 minutes. I think what I see when I look at this data, I think it's remarkable that you can go out to 250 employees in the US and the UK this year and go out to another 250 employees in the US and UK last year, different employees, and on these quantitative questions, get back such similar results. These are not 250 employees embedded in the same organization this year and last year. These are 250 employees working across 250 organizations this year and last year. So that societal stability as a researcher, I just find I was talking to my wife, who is an IO psychologist. I'm a social organizational psychologist, and I was just stunned at the amount of attitudinal stability year over year. So that's one point. The second point is it is a disconnect. It's a disconnect for me because there are so many. The story that I told you and that we saw in the data last year is this is a turbulent year, turbulent economy, K-shaped economy. I think what I see in this data this year, especially in comparison to last year, is that it's in the qualitative data and the qualitative trends that we're starting to see the anxiety come through. And I heard this statement as a researcher. So I've been doing employee research for the last 25 years. I don't know the source. I don't think it's an academic or empirical source. I think it is a practitioner um, source of wisdom. If any of you have heard what I'm about to tell you, you can chat it in or drop me a note. But the point is this. Um, Qualitative trends often precede quantitative results or quantitative trends. I don't know where I heard that in my consulting days, but the point that I'm trying to make is it's in the qualitative data that I was starting to go through that I think more of that anxiety, that worry comes out. And you see year over year some big differences, right? So the point I was making here is that worries are in the increase. We're seeing more people write more comments about more worries, and those specific worries are jumping out on the top of the page. Huge increases in concerns about company performance and profitability year over year, economic downturn and inflation year over year. So that's how I would start to answer that question. But I do think it's a mystery. Just to continue, so worries are on the rise. But this, I think, really caught my attention. This is where I left off. What are your aspirations for 2026? And what emerged as one of the top career aspirations in 2026 is maintaining my current job and avoiding layoffs. 22% of employees wrote in a comment to this open-ended question that expressed concerns about maintaining my current job, avoiding layoffs. Only 9% of respondents made a comment like that a year ago. In fact, a year ago, in response to this same question, the most common response was, if you want to know what my biggest career goal is in 2025, I want to get promoted and advance my career. And again, I think we're seeing in the qualitative data some really important attitudinal shifts or signals of shifts. Over on the right, summary coming from Remesh Summarize. I won't read through it, but I think the potential implication that I've called out in the bottom right is something we all need to pay attention to as leaders, as managers, as consultants, as internal employee listening leads. This data on this page, I don't know how you feel, but when asking people in an open-ended setting what your biggest career goal is for this year, and one of the most prevalent themes that emerges is I just want to keep my job, That suggests to me that we may be witnessing the emergence of a prevention-focused mindset. For those of you, as you go back to your grad school days, you may remember the internal regulation. You can either be prevention-focused, where you are trying to avoid mistakes, or you can be promotion-focused, where you are willing to take risks to grow. And I think that what we're seeing, at least for some employees, in this new year, this brave new year, 2026, and amongst all this tumult, is a shift from I really want to grow my career to I just want to cling to this job. I see that someone wrote in with a comment, so I'm happy to take that.
Yeah, more people want to start a side hustle too. It's almost like the workforce is starting to become ambivalent. That can't be
Yeah.
great for future productivity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think these are the things we need to start to pay attention to. And obviously, this is an exploratory field study just based on 250 employees. Just to cut to the chase, if you find this data intriguing, you should be exploring these questions with your own workforce, right? Because this may bear out. You may find results that are similar, you may not. But it's these kind of concerns about side hustle, prevention focus, ambiguity, uncertainty, ambivalence that I think, need to pay attention to as we manage the employee experience this year. I'll keep moving. The increase in worry and the focus on job stability as one of your career aspirations, at least for about 20% of respondents, is likely, and I think this is where many of our heads are at, it's likely because uncertainty is on the rise. And I'm not just saying uncertainty is on the rise abstractly or out in the media or the universe or the macroeconomic environment. I'm talking about in 2026 data versus 2025 data. In response to this open-ended question, what's the biggest challenge your organization is facing? You can see that this year, last year, very stable. 23% are saying maintaining profitability and financial stability. That's common. But look at the dramatic increase in concerns about economic uncertainty, revenue loss, new market conditions and customer habits, budget cuts. So we're really seeing, and it's summarized so well over on the right, we're really seeing, I think, these signals of uh, a different economic environment and a different workplace environment. In this workplace environment, we wanted to understand from employees what their organizations and their leaders are focusing on. And this is what we heard back. We asked, what are the main goals and objectives your leaders are emphasizing for 2026? We asked the same question last year. We can do the side-by-side comparison. And what you see is that leaders or respondents perceive that their organizations and their leaders are focusing on driving growth and hitting targets. When you break those two concepts down over on the right, it's interesting because what we're seeing is that overall, 48% of respondents talked about our organization is focused on financial performance, and 43% brought up topics that related to operational efficiency. But as you start to disaggregate that data and you start to analyze it by different levels, you can see quite a bit of a shift. At the C-suite level, most of the comments and responses to this question had to do with financial performance. 86% of senior leaders wrote about that, and that's really different than non-management employees. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we are seeing different perceptions of the organization, the organizational experience, and priorities and goals across levels. So as we start to wrap up, and I bring this to a close, just two more slides, and then I'll get into the implications. We wanted to understand from respondents what they think their organization should prioritize. And we did that two ways. Over on the left, we gave them a rank order list, similar to the emotions before. These appeared in random order. We asked them to rank order them. And what we found over on the left is that 24% of respondents think and want their organization to prioritize managing a volatile economic environment, and 17% said promote employee well-being. Similar by and large to last year, but we are seeing more people in 2026 really emphasize managing the volatile economic environment. Over on the right, we wanted to get at this question in an open-ended format. And we said, look, if you were to focus on just one thing, what would it be? And so what you see there are similar responses telling a similar story. Really, I think when we talk to employees this year, they're saying we need to make sure our organization is financially healthy and stable, and we need to take care of each other and ourselves. There are some nuanced finding differences. There are a couple of notable exceptions, right? So here I'm highlighting the top three priorities for non-management employees, frontline supervisors, middle management, and senior leaders in C-suite. What you notice across non-management, frontline supervisors, and middle management is quite a bit of correspondence. All three of those job levels are saying we really need to promote employee well-being and we need to focus on attracting and retaining talent. Where we start to see some nuance and difference is middle management is saying, look, we also need to focus on creating a skills-based organization. And when we talk to those senior leaders and C-suite leaders, they're saying, look, the second priority in our playbook is integrating Gen AI into the work environment. So managing these different priorities, I think, becomes a important task within our organizations. This is not necessarily bad, but we need to make sure that there aren't these points of disconnect. I talked about REMI as we start to run out of time. And if you do need to leave at 12:45, please do. We'll send out the recording and all the material, and we'll stay on just a little late. We won't run too late. I know this is really small text, super hard to read, but what we wanted to give you was kind of a insight both into the data itself and also what REMI makes possible. So what I did was I asked REMI this question. I said, based on respondent data, what are the three things that senior leaders should do now to help prepare their workforce and their organization for 2026? And REMI came back with three data-based recommendations from the respondents that we talked to, from the data that we all just looked at. And they said, first, you need to make employee well-being, security, and reasonable workload a non-negotiable strategic priority. I won't read through all the data, but underscored in red is the first recommendation REMI is making to leaders. Leaders should be acting now on mental health, staffing needs, realistic workloads, and transparent job security communication. The second thing that REMI said is you got to build a skills-based organization. This is interesting that it emphasized AI. Look, all researchers, self-included, and REMI are bringing their own positionality and their own perspective to the data. I don't know if I would have pulled this one out. I think it's interesting that it did. And I think it picked up on some of the data, especially those C-suite leaders advocating for Gen AI. We don't hear that from lower levels in the organization. And then the third thing is to strengthen organizational resilience. You can read through this when we send it over, but I found these recommendations from REMI to be interesting. I agree with 2 out of 3 of them, and there is evidence and background and support for all of them, so I can go investigate and as a researcher determine where I would end up. I know we're running out of time, so I want to wrap up with 3 recommendations or implications. And if there are any questions, I'll capture those, Gabby, from you at the end. Thank you all. I hope this has been interesting. The first thing I would say is this. Replicate this. If you found this research interesting, I wouldn't run with this data and say this is what's happening in our own organization. You need to replicate this research and you need to do it rapidly. What I mean by that is rapid research is research that is focused on understanding temporal issues, issues that are emerging and current only now. And if you want to forecast 2026 in your own organization, and you want to really understand what's coming up over the next 11 months, you probably want to do this study now. If you want help doing this study, drop us a note. We are happy to help you replicate this in your own organization. Not hard to do. But that would be the first thing. If anything here catches your eye, catches your attention, it is worth exploring with your own workforce. The second thing I think we need to pay attention to and ensure against is to see if this K-shaped economy is creating a K-shaped work environment in our organization. Remember, we saw that 43% of non-management employees are uncertain or doubtful that this will be a successful year in their organization. We found that 35% of female non-management employees feel exhausted or frustrated or worried or miserable. And we found that 29% of respondents in this year's research sample are worried about layoffs. Um, that's not a good place to be as an employee and as a workforce, to have a third of our workforce to be worried, stressed, exhausted, and worried about layoffs. And so I think we need to dig into our own data. We need to go out and talk to vulnerable populations. We need to identify who's at risk and develop support strategies to get those employees focused on work and through the year. The third thing, as we wrap up, is to involve your workforce in problem-solving dialogues. In this data, we heard across levels that employees, supervisors, managers, C-suite, they are eager to participate in identifying ways to solve for and navigate all these macroeconomic conditions. Quite a bit of concern around customer service, innovation, efficiency, market expansion, and other topics. And so now is a great time to engage your workforce, tap into their collective wisdom, their insights. And also, this creates confidence in the organization to be tackling problems and searching for solutions together. So it is a really important, pragmatic, and engaging task to really focus on how can we get better as an organization through dialogue and discussion. I know that was a lot as we zip through the end, but if you are still on and if you have any questions, happy to continue taking those, or surprises. Any key insights and takeaways, if you'd like to share, please do. If not, happy to talk to any and all of you after about that. And we also, Emma, Gabby, and I love doing these. We work hard on these together, and we are already excited about our next webinar, which will be the last Wednesday in February. I believe that's Wednesday, February 25th. It's at 12 noon, and we are going to actually be conducting a remesh conversation in vivo, live. We are going to be gathering 50 frontline supervisors. We're going to engage them in a discussion about identifying efficiency gains. And we're going to do an experiment with all of you and see how many insights can we gather in a short window of time, using the platform, using a live conversation, and then using all the analytical tools, including Remy on the back end. So if you want to see a remesh conversation unfold in front of your eyes, join, and I think it'll be a really fascinating discussion. I will stay on and be quiet and take time for questions in a second. But as I start to wrap up and let all of you go, thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for joining us at the start of the year. We will be doing these kind of conversations, these webinars on a monthly basis, on a bi-monthly basis, a couple times a quarter. If there are topics you are interested in, feel free to drop me a note, Gabby a note, Emma a note, because we're constantly looking for topics that are important to all of you as we build out this community of learning. We really hope that this was interesting today. We will be sure to pass along a recording, the deck itself, and if you do have any questions about what we did, what we found, or how you can replicate in your own organization, please do let us know. With that, I'll be quiet and I'll see if any questions are rolling in as we all let each other go. Okay. I think that's it, right, Gabby?
Yeah, that's it. Nice job, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you all. Really appreciate you joining, and we will hopefully see you next month.